Tariffs delayed again as the U.S. and China extend their truce. The economic superpowers had agreed to let the original deadline lapse, but the 90-day extension until November was only confirmed by last-minute executive order on Monday. Still, with U.S. import taxes now the highest since the Great Depression, will massive tariffs on Chinese products have to wait indefinitely? I'm Andrea Sankey, and this is the Newsmakers. If you're confused by Trump's tariffs and how and when they'll actually take effect, you're not alone. The day of reckoning for the U.S. and China was supposed to come Tuesday, but a meeting between their respective trade reps secured another delay in the implementation of those big tariffs. And so, November is the month we'll now keep our eye on. Another meeting between Presidents Trump and Xi is on the cards before then, but that still might not provide the certainty and stability both consumers and businesses want. Here's a look.
There could have been another shock to the global economy. Instead, the US and China have hit pause, extending their tariff truce for 90 days. The move stops US tariffs on Chinese goods from leaping back to 145% and keeps Beijing's from climbing to 125%. The May compromise, 30% on Chinese imports to the US and 10% on American exports to China, will now hold until November. The decision follows last-ditch diplomacy in Sweden, after earlier rounds in Geneva and London failed to resolve disputes over trade gaps, technology and market access. President Trump says ties with Beijing remain on good terms, even as differences remain.
We'll see what happens. We've been dealing very nicely with China, as you probably have heard. They have tremendous tariffs that they're paying to the United States of America. And we'll see what happens. They've been dealing quite nicely. The relationship is very good with President Xi and myself.
In China's capital, the extension drew a range of views. Some remain unconvinced it will change much.
I don't think the impact will be significant. Trump has been quite unpredictable lately, so I don't think we need to pay too much attention to this matter.
Others see the talks as a step in the right direction.
I feel that negotiations will definitely steer the two countries toward a better direction, toward achieving shared goals. As for tariffs, if no phase progress is made in future negotiations, the additional 25% tariffs might continue to be postponed.
Markets across Asia rallied, Tokyo's Nikkei hitting record highs. In the US, Wall Street barely moved, but the price of soybeans rose after Trump urged China to quadruple its orders. Some warn Washington's repeated tariff threats are losing their sting, their shock value fading with each unfulfilled warning.
When you look at how the U.S. has approached with making a lot of these threats, the challenge is that the shock value of these threats continue to diminish every time a threat comes, but it isn't executed upon. So what you really need for credibility is that you have to have some clear plan, some enforceability along that discussion path as well.
And bigger fights remain, from rare earth mineral exports and chip sales to Beijing's oil trade with Russia. And trade is already slowing. US imports from China down 15% this year, exports falling by a fifth. The extension keeps tariffs in check for now. But when November comes, it could steady the world's biggest trade relationship or reignite its fiercest fight.
So have tariffs only managed to slow trade between the two biggest economies, or is the U.S. actually winning the war that it's declared? And delaying the big tariffs illustrates that. Well, joining me now to try and make sense of it all are from Washington, D.C., professor at the National Defense University, Des Roches, From Beijing, Senior Research Fellow at the Center for China and Globalization, Andy Mock. And from Brussels, member of the Royal Academy of Belgium, Bruno Colmont. Thanks all so much for being with me. I just need first to understand your positions here on whether, this delay indicates something good, longer term, or does it just kind of delay an inevitable disaster? Because, Andy, I don't know, the U.S. can't be kind of the boy who cried wolf forever, can it?
Well, certainly not, Andrea. And I think that what this illustrates, this recent truce declared or acknowledged at the very last minute by President Trump, is that China is the only major power in the world that the U.S. could not bend to its will. And in fact, I think quite the opposite, that China has bent the U.S. to its will. And I think this actually is a positive for the future of China-U.S. relations.
David, would you agree there? Has the U.S. been able to, has China been able to bend the U.S. to its will via Trump's trade war? Go ahead.
Remains to be seen. I mean, this is a postponement, not a final settlement. But it is true. I mean, China is not like any other country when it comes to trade with the United States. And one of President Trump's challenges here is he has to balance his policy objectives with any disruption to the market. He's extremely sensitive to things like a rise in inflation or matters of that issue. But the volume of trade here is, China is big and the volume of trade is big, and it always has been a big and important country for the United States in trade terms. So I don't think we should be surprised that coming to a comprehensive renegotiation of a very long-standing trade regime is going to take more time than it takes to renegotiate trade with even a country as big as India.
We're looking at the screen and noting again that November 10th deadline. I just have to ask you, David, because you're in the United States, that November deadline will be right before Thanksgiving, just before Christmas. That is not when U.S. consumers want to see prices go up.
Yeah, but importers usually import now. They import in October and September for Christmas goods, many of which come from China, as you know. So if they go up in November, that shouldn't have that much of an effect. I mean, the things that American consumers are most price sensitive to are the cost of gasoline, and then the cost of fresh foodstuffs, things like milk, and for years it's been a sort of a political trope to ask a candidate how much a gallon of milk costs. Most of those are produced domestically or independent of China. China is a consumer, not an exporter of energy. But the finished goods that China does excel at, those will be exported. They're not exported in November for sale in December. So basically, this does give Trump a reprieve past the Christmas point that might be a memorable and noticeable downturn if prices surge for that.
Okay. Let me ask Bruno then how you see this having played out so far. Does there seem to be one player? I mean, Andy definitely thinks China has an upper hand of sorts here. David's not so sure. Where do you stand?
Well, I would say that the truce is a very good thing because it will give two countries 90 days to renegotiate. Because today the situation is so that U.S. tariffs on the Chinese goods remains at 30%. Chinese tariffs on U.S. goods at 10%. So they need to find an agreement because the two economies are so dependent on each other that it would be unthinkable not to find an agreement. So basically, I wouldn't be surprised that eventually both tariffs would be at 10 or 15% on both sides because China needs to export to the U.S., and the U.S. economy, at any price, needs Chinese goods. So basically, they find an agreement. And we've seen that happening with Europe. U.S. tariffs are now at 15%. The threat was that it would be at 30%, so it was a 50% decrease. I think the same thing will happen with China. And they need some time to make a long-term agreement between the two countries.
Okay, please explain quickly, Bruno, if you can, what the tariffs that have been imposed have meant so far to the global economy and to the countries involved. Who is really feeling it?
Well, I would say that the winner today is the US. The US economy has a trade deficit. It has been the case since decades. And Trump wants to renegotiate the relationship between the US and the rest of the world. So basically, if I would be an American, I would do what Trump is doing. I would maybe entertain some protectionism. I would also convince my trading partners to invest into the US. So what he's doing makes full sense. Is importing jobs and money into the US. We, as Europeans, for example, will suffer some unemployment and some loss of production capacities. So it will take a while to settle, but I think that in 2 or 3 years, when companies will adjust their business case, we'll be all right. And the one thing that tariffs can avoid is a monetary war between countries, because if there wouldn't be an agreement on commercial terms, then suddenly we could see a depreciation of the US dollar, which, by the way, would have the same effect as tariffs, and that would be more severe than any tariff and trade policy.
Okay. It's interesting, Andy, because Bruno seems to be able to kind of make sense of what has happened and how it will unfold further down the line. But for many others, a huge problem in understanding all of this is how the numbers are interpreted, even spun, whether it's, trade data or jobs numbers. So I'll put it this way. Is there the potential here to not be able to understand the real damage until it's too late? Almost like subprime mortgages and derivatives that we saw in the lead up to the 2008 crash. Many economists talked about it as if it all came together, all the numbers added up, and then all of a sudden we saw what we saw. Is there the same danger here?
Well, Andrea, I think you make a great comparison, and I think Warren Buffett called these mortgage-backed securities weapons of mass financial destruction, if memory serves. I do see this as a somewhat different situation in that I think President Trump certainly is engineering a very profound change in the structure of the U.S. domestically, as well as how it relates to the world. And as I understand it, he's looking to address 3 interrelated problems that he and most of the Republican Party sees as existential. So the first, of course, is the national debt and the deficit. The second is a sclerotic federal bureaucracy, including an overly burdensome tax regime. And then finally, it's the deindustrialization of the United States. So I think he sees tariffs as kind of a Swiss Army knife to turn this into a Department of External Revenue versus internal revenue, reducing the tax burden on Americans, bringing back important industries to the United States, and then making the economy domestically more competitive and presumably internationally more competitive as well by lowering tax rates and regulations. So I think that certainly, to me at least, it makes sense. And I think all of what he's doing is internally coherent. Now, whether he can pull it off remains to be seen. Now, what we're seeing, of course, is that this is very, very disruptive to the global trading system. And I think we have to see how it turns out. I think China certainly has drawn a line and said, that it's going to defend its interests. I think the U.S. has acknowledged everything from the change in tone from people like Secretary Bessent to, of course, President Trump himself. I think acknowledges that that China must be worked with as a peer and not dictated to as perhaps a vassal state. And I think that this is very much a work in progress. But, again, I feel optimistic about this in the long run, and that I certainly do see the U.S. Adopting a more realistic understanding of its relationship with China. And here I would add to what David said, that inflation, of course, is very important, but there are some strategic issues that I think is driving President Trump's behavior as well. Look at rare earth metals, and not just for commercial applications, but it is vital for missiles, night vision goggles, fighter jets. And I think this is very top of mind for the administration. Look at Boeing jets as well, not only revenue for itself, but because it underwrites a key defense contractor. And I would also say, look at soybeans. President Trump recently, I think today or yesterday, said that he hoped China would increase its purchase of American soybeans by a multiple of 3 or 4. And I think these are domestically potent political issues, but pose very real national security considerations as well, I think, which is driving this rethink and change in tone of how the U.S. is dealing with China.
Huh. It's fascinating because, I mean, we've heard the word disruptive, disrupting over and over again in all of this. But I'm fascinated with hearing your tone of some sort of, I want to say, predictability in how this is supposed to turn out, because so many, David, as you know, so many have complained about the unpredictability of Trump's policies and some of the changing his mind on the tone and the way that things will be done has caused all this volatility in the markets. But I don't know, can Trump actually manage to capitalize on that unpredictability, or will it backfire?
Well, I mean, the unpredictability, I think, is a policy approach. And I think in terms, in large part, it may be by design, but these are complex issues, and so the unpredictability, you take one policy movement, you get unforeseen consequences, and I think you react to those. That level of flexibility is interpreted by markets as unpredictability. I think the two are really sort of left brain, right brain, and I'm not sure whether unpredictability is viewed as a goal in his economic calculations. But the bigger issue is the fact that, prior to the pandemic starting, most of the world economically was based on sourced on this sort of just-in-time model. And I think that when the pandemic, this fine network of suppliers crossing borders, moving in and out. When the pandemic hit and disrupted global trade, I think that was sort of it hasn't been remarked on, but I think that was sort of a mental turning point for a lot of people who realized that this idea that international trade would be a network that couldn't be disrupted, well, it had been disrupted. And I think that led people to think more innovatively about, first off, protecting domestic markets that in the American calculus, the promise of free trade hadn't been reached. A lot of countries that we thought we were free trading with actually had protected their own markets, or were using, for example, prison labor, slave labor, things like that. And I think that also other policy issues like the manipulation of the refinement of rare earths that Andy mentioned, which led to a decrease in production of rare earths in other countries, basically a mercantilist policy. People in the United States started seeing that. And so economic models that had been generally assumed were questioned, and Trump brought back tariffs, which honestly hadn't been a major policy issue since World War I.
Yeah. Let me come back to Bruno, because, Andy mentioned the U.S. Treasury Secretary, and according to Scott Bessent, that he said the other day, I believe it was, pardon me if I'm wrong, on MSNBC, that he actually clarified that it's the importer, the U.S. company, that will be paying the tariffs at the dock and can then decide whether to pass that on to consumers. Now, it surprised some because it really showed that either the U.S. import company, the business, will have to pay these taxes, or the U.S. consumer will have to pay these taxes. And the U.S. consumer didn't think that was part of the deal, according to what the administration was peddling. So, how good is this for the U.S. economy? Will the U.S. consumer or U.S. businesses really have to pay all of this?
Well, I think that the idea is that U.S. goods produced in the U.S. would be a substitute to what is being imported. Will it work? Not totally. And of course, the tariffs will have to be paid by somebody, either the consumer or the shareholders of companies importing goods. But I would like to come back on one point. The question is to know, was this predictable or not? And if you take a deep look into what Stephen Miron, one of the economic advisors of Trump, wrote 6 months ago, he put on paper that the idea was to start with tariffs, then to change, to depreciate the currency, and to entertain long-term agreement with some countries so that the US public debt would be financed by the rest of the world. So what we are assisting today is the first step of a longer-term plan. And of course, it will make everybody poor, except, of course, the US Treasury. But basically, I'm pretty sure that in 2 or 3 years, things will settle and there will be a remapping of global trade benefiting to the US, of course, to the detriment of some exporters. So what we are seeing today is an adjustment to global trade and not something that will disrupt international trade like COVID-19 did a couple of years ago.
It's very calming to hear you say that because, Andy, and we all know that people don't necessarily feel that way. They really fear what might be to come. Andy, let me ask you, though, on another completely different topic, actually, because going forward in all of this has to be negotiated between the leaders and negotiators involved. And it's very important to have those kinds of relationships. Now, some global leaders aren't fans of Trump. They don't really work well with him. But he seems to think that he and Xi Jinping have a great relationship. At least that's what he's expressed. And that will matter. Will it not? Do they have that good relationship that he's talked about? And is it not fundamental to how this will all work out in the end?
Well, Andrea, I think it certainly does, but I just want to make a quick point before I address your question. It's conventional economic theory that consumers end up paying the tariffs, but I think we're missing an important piece of the equation here. And even if that were true, American consumers pick up all of the tariff increases and they pay more for everything they're buying. That's not necessarily a bad thing because we have to recognize that that revenue goes to the US government, and that could be spent on income tax decreases, as we've seen with the One Big Beautiful Bill. It could be higher wages for American workers. So I think we have to be careful here and not focus just on the tariff side. But again, I think Trump has laid out a very complete and I think a very compelling vision for, at least compelling for many Americans. And of course, many Americans oppose what he wants to do as well. But I think we should try to really look at it in its entirety. Now, to answer your question about the Trump and Xi relationship, I don't personally know either of these men, but what it seems, I think, is there's definitely mutual respect. And what really matters here is that the Chinese system is very unitary. So President Xi, of course, has the authority and the power to make many decisions and make sure they are implemented. The U.S., of course, it has gone back and forth, separation of powers, et cetera. But I think what Trump, again, is doing, that is a very profound change, is strengthening the executive branch to make sure that he does have sufficient power and authority to address, again, what he and his supporters see as existential problems facing the United States. And this is another cause for my optimism as well, in that if these two leaders can reach an accommodation and both have enough political power domestically, we certainly can put a lot of this turmoil, at least this uncertainty, behind us. And from a business and investment perspective, it's not so much about the absolute level of the tariffs, but it's the unpredictability of them. Because once you know what the numbers are, you can make your investment plans, you can make your operation plans. But if it's Vietnam is paying X tariff today, 3X 6 months from now, that really becomes it's a paralyzing situation, which is I think again what is causing a lot of the angst all around the world.
Yeah, and I think, David, especially on the ground in the U.S.,
Yeah.
you see these vendors, and importers really scrambling to try to organize, their inventories, to figure out where their supplies are going to be, where they're going. That's an incredible amount of stress for everyone to deal with. But you think it'll be worth it?
Well, if it works out, I mean, nothing succeeds like success. And, the problem is if it works, it's genius. And if it fails, it's hubris. You can't really tell at the point of implementation. But, the one clarification I'd make to these, and my compliments to the other analysts, is I'm having to pedal really fast to keep up, is the shock of a tariff is only paid one time. So, typically if there's a new tariff, and an importer is told by customs that he's got a shipping container and he has to pay an additional $4,000 to get that released to him, he'll pay that one time. And then he will look around and go through a process of analysis to say, okay, can I import this from someplace that I only have to pay $2,000 in tariff, or can I source it domestically? So I think that you have an initial shock of tariffs, and that cost will be either absorbed by the company or paid for by the consumers, as Secretary Bessent noted. But I think that one of Trump's explicit goals is to get these things resourced to the United States and have whatever the hot Christmas toy is made in Ohio rather than sourced, assembled in Vietnam from sources in India, China, and elsewhere. So there needs to be an adjustment. That requires predictability.
Yeah, which we seem to really lack right now. But anyway, we'll be checking in with you guys, I'm sure, in the next 3 months or so to see where this all stands again. But for right now, we're completely out of time for this edition of the Newsmakers. I'd like to thank all three of you so much for being with me, and our viewers for joining us as well. Remember, you can follow us on social media, and do be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. I'm Andrea Sankey. We'll see you next time.